It's a pleasure to share an idea or a few ideas about Pesach on behalf of Ohr Somayach. We go back a long way, Ohr Somayach and I, and Pesach and us, I guess. So let's think about Pesach and maybe ask the question that is the most basic of all. And that is, why is everything that we do related to Pesach? You know, Pesach is a journey, the origin of a journey. Destination is Shavuot, and origin is Pesach. So really the journey lasts from the miracles of Pesach, Exodus, until the destination, which is receiving the Torah. And the question is, why do you name a journey? Why do you characterize a journey in terms of its point of origin? Surely we should be talking about destination. And yet almost everything in Torah is Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim. That is recollection, in honor of, recollection, memory of the Exodus from Egypt. You know, when you think about a journey that you take, a life journey, something very significant, a significant journey that you've undertaken in your life, you think about destination. Of course, you need to know the point of origin. That's important. You need to know where to get the train. But you don't name journeys for their point of origin. You name them for destination. And yet everything we do in Judaism relates to the point of origin, the destination, the leaving, the Exodus from Egypt. Why are we celebrating the Exodus much more than anything else in Torah? More even than the point of destination, which is receiving the Torah. It is true, and it's clear, it should be obvious, that the point of origin, the Exodus from Egypt, is named in terms of destination as well. Obviously, the journey begins there and ends at the receiving of the Torah. And even during our Pesach Seder, when we celebrate the Exodus from Egypt, of course, we focus on the fact that it leads to a destination. But there's no question that the heavy emphasis is on departure. Take, for example, the Pesach Seder, the most dynamic, intensive, amazing Jewish educational experience of all time, of all lifetime. What do we talk about there? The blaze of miracles in Egypt, the experiences in Egypt, the leaving Egypt with the matzahs, the whole experience is the Exodus. Hardly a word about destination. True, we talk about it in Dayenu. We talk about the fact that this is all for the purpose of receiving the Torah and becoming unique as a Jewish people, continuing that march through history with that cosmic, dynamic document, if you like, called the Torah. But there's no question that the heavy emphasis is on the departure. Think about the mitzvahs. The mitzvahs in the Torah. Virtually half the mitzvahs in the Torah, maybe more, are Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim. Mezuzah, of all things. False weights and measures. You name it. Virtually every mitzvah you can think of in the Torah is Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim. Why Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim and not Zecher L'Kabbalah Satera? And we could expound on this question. We could expand the question at length. But I think you get the point. That is a strange phenomenon. How do we explain it? Why are we so focused on our departure, where we began, rather than our tachlis, if you like, our point of climactic destination of receiving the Torah? And the answer is this. Remarkably simple idea, and often forgotten, is the departure from Egypt is where we became who we are. It is true that we fulfilled that destiny by receiving the Torah, but the paradigm shift, if you like, to use a phrase that is current in scientific history, a paradigm shift occurred when we left Egypt. Let's spend a few minutes trying to work that out together, because nothing could be more fundamental than this. By the way, you know, even when we talk about Shabbos, celebrating Shabbat, which is truly the pinnacle of Jewish experience, even there, when we make Kiddush on Shabbos, we say, Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim, incredibly and amazingly. Shabbat, which is a premonition, if you like, of the world to come, ultimate destination. It is true that we say, Zecher L'Maaseh Bereshis, it's true. After all, Shabbos celebrates the creation of the world. It is a closing of a circle of creation. But in those very words, in the same words in Kiddush, we say Zecher L'Tzias Mitzrayim. Amazingly, the cosmic destination of history called Shabbos is commemoration of what? The departure from Egypt, not the receiving of the Torah. The answer is because that was the ultimate paradigm shift. Let's think about that for a moment and see if we can understand why. Let's begin with the Pesach Seder. This dynamic and amazing interactive educational experience. By the way, we have nothing like that when it comes to Shavuos. We don't reenact the receiving of the Torah in anything like as dynamic or impressive a way as we do the Pesach Seder. The focus on the children at Pesach. This is what burns into their consciousness, what it means to be Jewish, is all about the Exodus. What do we celebrate during the Pesach Seder? The most remarkable insight into this is provided by the Rambam. When the Rambam lists and delineates, characterizes the mitzvah of telling the departure, telling about departure from Egypt, Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, what the Haggadah is all about, the Rambam says, and you'll find this in the laws of Chometz and Matzah, when the Rambam goes in the 7th chapter, when the Rambam starts discussing the laws of the Seder, the Rambam says, mitzvahs essay min Torah, it's a positive mitzvah of the Torah, lesaper, to tell, and then the next words surely should be the story of the Exodus. After all, the Rambam in the very next line quotes the source in the Torah that tells us to talk about the departure from Egypt. And he omits those words. Listen to his words. The Rambam says, it's a positive mitzvah of the Torah, lesaper, to tell, benissim v'niflois, the miracles and wonders that our ancestors experienced on this night. Not a word about an Exodus. Isn't that remarkable? The Torah tells us that you need to tell your children on this night about departure from Egypt. And how does the Rambam phrase that? Talk about the miracles that occurred then. Surely we take the Torah's words very, very literally. We never depart from the literal meaning. And yet the literal meaning of talking about the Exodus, the Rambam omits entirely. All he talks about is the miracles. And in case you think I'm putting too fine a point on it, 2 paragraphs later the Rambam says, and how do you speak to your children? He says, if you have a child who's sophisticated and can understand, you tell him, my son, we experienced miracles on this night. And then the Rambam says, if you have a very small child, very intellectually undeveloped, you say, on this night we were freed from slavery to freedom. Meaning that the simple story of an exodus, of a transition from slavery to freedom, let's call it a geopolitical story, you tell only to the very youngest of children. But as soon as a child has more intellectual sophistication, what do you say to the child? We experienced miracles. That is remarkable. And the idea is very clear. The Rambam's vision that he's teaching us is the vision of leaving Egypt is not a transition from one country to another. It's not even a transition from slavery to freedom. It's a transition from the natural to the supernatural. That's the birth of the Jewish people. The focus on the exodus from Egypt is not that the fact that we moved from one geopolitical paradigm to another. That's not the point. The point is that we exited the natural and we entered the supernatural. That's the exodus. We exited a natural world and moved into a supernatural world. The point, if you didn't talk about that at your Pesach Seder, you didn't emphasize to your children that we moved from a natural into supernatural, you didn't talk about the exodus. In Rambam's phrasing, those are synonymous. And that's the consciousness a Jew needs to live with. Not that we went from one place to another. Every country has its national history and its national story. Ours is not a national story. Ours is a supernatural story. And that is the point. The point is, in Egypt, for example, what was the first mitzvah we received? HaChodesh hazeh lachem. This month shall be the beginning of the months. Chodesh is Chodesh, something new. We moved into a new zone of time, if you like. Until then, time proceeded in a way like all nations' time. A flow, a river flowing that washes you along from one moment to the next. Our vision of that sort of time is really a dying. Because what happens to your present? Your present immediately moves always into a past. Your whole life is just a flash of memory. What we learned when we left Egypt was to move into a new type of time. Not a time which is a river flowing inexorably on, but a time which we call Zman. Zman means Zimun. Zman means a preparation for something, a moving towards, a constant cosmic expansion of consciousness and awareness and spirit. And that's the change that occurred then. And therefore, the beginning of the story of the Jewish people's existence, of our journey through history, begins with moving into a new type of time. A time which has in its sights always a vision of the future. Something being prepared, something being built. They're radically different than time was before that. That's one way to see it. Another way to see it is that the miracles changed then. You know, perhaps the deepest way to say it in the words of the Zohar is that our forefathers, before the Egyptian experience, never knew the name of Hashem. They were aware of the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, but the only name they had connection with was Hashem's other names, so-called lesser names, or derivative names. But the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, Hashem's name of essence, Shmi Hashem lo nodati lahem, says the Torah. My name of essence I never made known personally at first hand to the forefathers. Leaving Egypt was a blaze of awareness of that name. And that name means complete and utter transcendence. Other names of Hashem generate miracles. They can distort the natural. They can manipulate it. But the name of Hashem, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, completely overrides nature. Perhaps the best way to see that is in understanding the nature of the change in miracles. Until that time in history, miracles occurred. But miracles were then simply a setting aside of the natural. A man's thrown into a fire, Avram Avinu, and he doesn't burn. Well, that's miraculous. But there are things that are in fire that don't burn. You can wrap your head around that in some sort of a way. But when we left Egypt, things became completely, miracles became of a different order entirely. When Moshe Rabbeinu presages the Exodus, presages the receiving of the Torah, and he stands at Sinai originally and he sees a bush burning, the meaning of that bush burning and not being consumed is not simply that there was a fire around the bush. The correct understanding is that it was burning totally in every sense of the word and not burning at the same time. And the miracles from that point on take on that nature. What Rashi calls nes b'seich nes, miracle within miracle. Example, when the water turns to blood. The waters of the Nile turn to blood. So people think, the children are usually taught to think that it was water for us and blood for the Egyptians. That means a Jew held a cup of water, it was water. The Egyptian grabbed it, it became blood. That's not correct. It was blood and water at the same time. Blood for us and water for them at the same time. If they would have drank the same drop of blood, it would have been water for us and blood for them. You're talking about miracle within miracle. This is not a setting aside of nature. This is annihilation of all concept of nature entirely. The Sfas Emes points out, classically and beautifully, when the Jewish people finally left Egypt and moved through the sea, what does the Torah tell us? They moved in the midst of the ocean on dry land. That means they were underwater on dry land. Is that possible? No, but it happened. We begin where the impossible ends. It wasn't a case of the waters splitting, so we walked where the waters had once been. That's not what the Torah says. But toch hayam bayabasha, in the midst of the ocean on dry land, not where the ocean used to be. That's what the Sfas Emes tells us. This is a completely paradoxical dimension of miracle, in which at one and the same time we are walking on dry land and walking underwater at the same time. Can you understand that? No. That is a complete annihilation, obliteration of all concept of nature. That's what the name Yud Kei Vav Kei means. When the Jewish people finally build the Mishkan in the desert, and they put the Aron Kodesh, they put the Aron inside the Kodesh Kodashim, the Gemara tells us it occupied no space. Not that it shrank or the room expanded. If you measured from wall to wall, you got the same measurement as if you measured from the wall to the Aron. Aron eno min amida. The Aron completely transcends all dimensions of space. If the Aron would have shrank, it would be invalid. If the Kodesh Kodashim would have expanded, it would have been invalid. They occupied their full measurements and yet took no space at all. This is not a setting aside of nature. This is a total overriding of nature. The Jewish people move not only from the natural to the supernatural, Pesach. They move beyond the supernatural. We move into a dimension not where nature can simply be set aside. We move into a dimension that is completely and utterly beyond all sense of nature. That's who we are as a people. The Chidush Harim points out that we have the chutzpah to sit at a Pesach Seder and call it a Seder. What do we talk about on this night? A complete breaking of Seder, a complete breaking of all sorts of order at every level, and we call it a Seder. That's our Seder. The Jewish people's Seder is something that for other people is beyond supernatural. And that's the message. And therefore, wherever you touch the Exodus, wherever you touch Judaism, wherever you touch Torah, you find it goes back to that critical, amazing moment where we were born into a totally different dimension. From then on, it becomes a natural progression that we move through the desert and we conquer the forces in the desert and we receive the Torah and bond with Hashem that He should kiss us with the kisses of His mouth. That is all true. But it begins, the critical moment is leaving Egypt. And therefore, this Pesach, I think, the message to take with us is that when we talk to our children about the Exodus, we should not simply be telling them that we had a political history or a geographical history or a national story. Of course, that's important. That's the background. The Rambam doesn't mean to ignore that. But that's not the point. The point of our Seder is that we moved from a natural into a supernatural world. We became an unnatural people. And you see it so clearly. 4,000 years later, having survived most of that time without a country, without a police force, without an army, tiny speck of humanity. Even when we occupied a country, the country is so small you can run across it in a day. You can easily jog from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, if you'd be so minded, in less than a day. No problem at all. It's the size of the Kruger National Park, speaking as a proud South African. But it was enough. In that tiny speck of land, in that tiny speck of demographics that we represent, we have been a transcendent people. And during those 4,000 years, most of the world have been trying to destroy us. And amazingly, we're still here. And the reason is because we walk with our feet on this planet and our heads in another dimension entirely. I wish you all a wonderful Pesach, a sharp awareness of the fact that we live on another plane, another planet, another dimension. It's true we receive Torah, we transmit that through the ages, But the defining moment in our history was when we left Egypt, and therefore everything we do is Zecher Yetzias Mitzrayim.
Hi, this is Peretz Baruch Eichler, a proud alumnus of Ohr Somayach. Now what you just watched is one of the many programs that Ohr Somayach provides, leaving its impact on hundreds of thousands with so many more waiting to be reached. Ohr Somayach's central campus in Jerusalem has over 300 students presently learning there. And now you can be a vital part of spreading that bounty of knowledge worldwide by logging on to donate.ohr.edu. We can step up to the plate at this pivotal moment of Ohr Somayach's growth and bring the next generation of Jews home.